In China, we don't have the Christian moral doctrine. We don't deduce morality from any kind of divine law. Like the evil of the colonizing West when Russia, Japan invaded China, took over Hong Kong, took over mainland China. We would like to take those territories back because there are only fight and flee. No liberty, no compromise, no equality. We are always in a continuous revolutionary state. Chinese TikTok, Chinese Instagram had a huge impact on people's daily lives. Such a weird feeling when you talk to those Chinese inside in foreign countries. They always criticize the government, the CCP, but in a similar way that they want to be reunified with their people, with another party, with another strong central government. That is so strange.
You realize we're solving world peace by doing this? All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Athling Honor Show, where each episode is a new ripple containing unknown but unlimited impact. I am super happy today to have a good friend and somebody who's been on the podcast before, I would think probably 4 times, and that is Anshan Li. So, Anshan, thank you so much for being here. It's great to see you, and it's been a while.
It's also a pleasure for me to be invited to a fantastic podcast. Yes. And congratulations for your reaching 790 subscribers. I believe you're going to reach 1,000 very, very soon. And also, I'm it's I'm just more than happy to see you, though remotely, but to see an old friend and happy face is such a pleasure for me.
Well, make sure to hit that subscribe button, of course, if you haven't done so already, as Anshin said, because we are trying to get to 1,000. So make sure to do that if you haven't done so already. But Anshin, for those of for those watching who don't know, tell everybody where you are in the world, because I'm in the States right now. But where are you?
Oh, I'm in Nanking, China, and I must thank for the huge, huge development of those technology that we can talk with each other, even though we are located in the two far, far away cities, like the two separate hemispheres.
Well, you
And
realize we're solving world peace by doing this. Talking from somebody from the United States and talking from China. We're solving diplomatic peace on a global scale by doing this.
I would, I would not hope so, but I hope that China and America could have a more friendly and peaceful relationship with each other.
Well, listen. One of the big things that's happening right now in the States is we're getting ready for like Christmas time, and there's big trees and big lights and whatever. And so one of the questions I had, as I always have this for people, is like, I don't know anything about what goes on during this time in other countries. I know a little bit about what happens inside of Europe, but outside of Europe, I mean, I'm very curious to know. Are you guys? Is there kind of this also sentiment? Oh, it's almost Christmas, or is that not at all like important in China? Or do people in China generally celebrate Christmas? Do they not celebrate Christmas? Obviously,
Well,
well, I should say this: China's a country of over 1 billion. You're one person. You can't speak for everybody, but just maybe you have some kind of perspective on that.
yes, yes, I do. And I don't think I don't think I can speak on behalf of the Chinese, but on behalf of me and my family members, I don't think we have any kind of sentimental stuff for celebrating Christmas because Christmas is, first of all, not hasn't been celebrated in China for a long, long while. Like before the open and reform policy, just started to celebrate after we get in touch with Western culture, Western companies, and it's quite a recent phenomenon. And you also mentioned about China is a very, very huge country, and it's worth to mention that there are billions of Muslims who are living in China, and I do not think most of them, like in their traditional way, will or would celebrate Christmas, but that kind of thing is ever changing. So who knows? But talking about Christmas in my city, Nanking, first of all, probably I should briefly touch about its location. It's located around 300 kilometers on the west part of Shanghai, and it's used to be the capital of China when Kuomintang was in power. So it's not that kind of ancient or remote from the Western culture, but also it's not as developed as Shanghai. People in Nanking used to celebrate Christmas, and I can recall that vividly when I was a child. When my parents put Christmas socks in near my bed, and when I woke up, I can find some candies or probably toys if I was behaving properly or getting good scores from the school. And those things happened, I think, for most of the Chinese around my age, 25, 26 to 30. Also, when I was in middle school, and we used to organize some kind of celebration in our class, do some quizzes, bring each other some gifts, and probably even there's kind of interclass or intergrade, seventh grade, eighth grade, intergrade celebration. People just go to each other and say Happy Christmas. But now I think now it's 2024 and it's quite different, I think. First of all, is the rise of populism in China. And I think it is a very huge problem. If I have time, I wish to discuss it more in the later. But the second problem is the economy. The people just don't very much have the confidence and have the financial support to let them celebrate Christmas because there are huge celebration. There is or probably there are huge celebrations afterwards. The New Year, Chinese New Year, those two very important things. And I think the third thing is a psychological one, and it's closely related to the COVID. I think people's mental mind or people's view of celebration, etc., those kind of activities has been dramatically changed after COVID. People just probably are more anxious and more depressed, and not that kind of happy and prosperous anymore. And it's also a very huge topic that, if you allow me to touch upon it. And in the summary, I think people used to celebrate Christmas in my city, but now it's different. There are rising of populism, which means they are trying to focus more on traditional Chinese holidays and activities, and also their financial. They're limited by their pockets. They can't. People just don't. People used to organize big parties, probably organize only small parties, and people used to organize small parties. Now try to organize zero parties, and also people are getting more and more depressed and anxious.
There's so much there that I wanna ask about, and there's kind of a lot of like pop points that I'd love to go on tangents about. But I do want to ask, what is the dominant like religion in China for those who don't know? I mean, what is the dominant religion that is practiced?
The dominant religion that is practiced in China. Before I answer that question, I don't think I am the good person to ask because I am living in the forest, which I cannot see the forest. I can only see trees. Whereas you, as an outsider, you can see the whole forest from a from a wider angle, which means the question probably should be answered by foreigners rather than Chinese.
Okay, well, what is
Because
hold on, like
yes,
what do the official statistics say about what is the most popular or widely practiced religion in China? Maybe those statistics aren't exactly correct, but I mean, what is the prevailing wisdom, or do you know?
I do not know the statistics, but if you want my answer, I have two answers. One is in my city and in the areas that I've lived in, I would say Buddhism. Buddhism is the dominant religion in the Han Chinese, and also widely practiced, accepted by Han Chinese. But if you want to ask what is the religious practice for most of the Chinese, I would say money seeking, because rather
Did you
than
say did you wait,
believing,
wait, did you say money seeking?
yes, money
Okay.
seeking. Because I would say rather than trying to think reflectively on themselves or to think about the problems of prenatality and um, fatality and mortality, those kind of stuff. They would like to try to live the best possible life in this period, which means they want more money, more food, more wine, more better cars, better houses, and that's the way when I see people go to religious institutions, and they,
It sounds like you're
yeah.
describing American culture then. If money making is the main religion, that sounds like American consumerism.
Well, I'm not very familiar with American
No, I'm
consumerism,
kidding.
but
I'm kidding. But I mean,
okay.
isn't everybody to an extent? I mean, driven by money making and like. But I guess you were saying that kind of culturally or officially, Buddhism among the Han Chinese is generally the most like most people identify with Buddhists or would say they're Buddhist if they had a gun to their head and said, "What religion are you?"
No, what I meant Buddhism is when people want to have some certain kinds of religious belief, when they are living some kinds of uncertainty, or when they are afraid of their afterlife, they the religious practice that they would like to seek is Buddhism. Because first of all, Buddhism is has been rooted and developed in China for thousands of years. Like in the Han Dynasty, people have been coming from India and try to teach people, try to preach Buddhist doctrines and idea to Chinese people. And also, Buddhism is the main idea, from my understanding of Buddhism, is to release pain and suffering. And there are as much pain and suffering as possible, as you can imagine in China, I believe. So people want to release their suffering and pain. And the most important thing is I'm just speaking of Han Chinese people and those areas located near Shanghai, Jiangsu, Sichuan. No, not Sichuan. Sorry, Wales, Zhejiang. Those three provinces that is quite closely tied up together, very close to Shanghai, like Shanghai, Jiangsu, Zhejiang. There's well two provinces and one city. People practice Buddhism most in these areas, but to speaking of other provinces and much, much larger, like Xinjiang or Tibet, it's definitely not the case. Though Xinjiang used to be like probably hundreds of years, probably before Tang, after Tang Dynasty, there are still hundreds of Buddhist kingdom in that area, but now it's totally different. And speaking of Tibet, they do believe in Buddhism, but a different type. They have a Tibetan Buddhist doctrine. Rather in mainland China, it's another type. I have to Google for the name, but they have very different teaching. That's a very good question. I think Taoism will be practiced more and more in the future, just probably in next decade, because the one of the Taoism doctrine is to focus on transcendent stuff, I should not say transcendental, transcendent, which means objects that beyond the limit of knowledge. They really want to focus on this stuff in order to avoid worldly stuff. That's why people want to avoid more pain and to escape from their suffering. And it's more Chinese comparing to Buddhism because Buddhism is actually from India. So it's if populism is going to be a phenomenon in China, then Taoism, I assume, will be practiced more in the future. And second is because Taoism is linked more closely to politics comparing to Buddhism. Back into Chinese history, in most of the dynasties, we do have emperors who believe in Taoism and try to know their fortune or try to do something comparing to Buddhism. Because Taoism that we as Chinese can manipulate, or sorry, I should not use the word manipulate. We can interpret them in a very creative way, whereas Buddhist doctrine scholars would like to learn Sanskrit rather than learn traditional Chinese.
Can I ask what is the main difference between Taoism and Buddhism? Is there a main difference, or are they just completely, incongruent, incompatible? Um,
I think they are completely incomparable. Forgive my ignorance. Actually, I don't know much about Chinese Eastern religion, but for me, I would summarize Buddhism in one sentence that is to escape or to forgive. But for Taoism is to fight back and to organize and to fight back. I think that's very different. Yes.
um, you mentioned Chinese New Year. Now, I think everybody in the West knows of Chinese New Year. They always want to know like what year, what Chinese zodiac sign they're born in, and the festivals. But I don't think people really understand. I think very few people actually understand what it's about. Um, and also, I would like to know like how is it actually celebrated in your city, your home city, and is that unique to your city, or is that kind of uniform across China?
What do you mean by unique in my city?
Well, is the way that the Chinese New Year is celebrated in the city you live in, is it different? Like, is it specific to your city, or is it uh, practiced in a way that is in line with the rest of the country, or that's traditional? Um,
Well, first of all, each individual is different, which means in each city there are going to be nuance with of the celebration. For instance, in my city, there is going to be a huge celebration, aka Lantern Festival, located in the south part of the city, and it had it has been a tradition for for a few decades, I think. Well, I'm not quite sure how long officially, but from my well, it's just a tradition. And this kind of lantern festival is you can't find it much elsewhere in other cities. Also, because in most of the big cities, like millions of inhabitants in China, most of the inhabitants are Chinese, Han Chinese. And it turns out most of the Han Chinese would celebrate the Chinese New Year in a very similar way. Um, Dragon dancing, a family gathering, probably also binge drinking. And those activities, actually, I just can't find much descriptions of those activities because um, you just mentioned that the Western people are so confused of most of the Western, well, some of the Western people do have confusions of the naming about the naming of Chinese New Year. It's a very simple system. We have 12 signs dedicated to each year, and when one circle goes around, we just started another from 1 to 12. So you can count it in a mathematical way. In the first one, we named it as mouse. In the second one, we named it as oxen. In the third one, we named it as tiger, uh, so on and so on. And when we go all around to the 12th one, then we go back to the first one. That's basically how it counts. And there are no meaning on those signs because they are just signs. They don't have any meaning.
So they're just kind of placeholders for the years, but they don't actually mean anything.
Yes, yes, indeed, they are just placeholders. And in Tibet, they do have similar calendar system, but they count it differently. Instead of using just one, how should I say it? One dossier of animals. They use two dossiers. One dossier which have animals placeholder inside, and another dossier which has elements placeholder inside. And they just combine these two together and to run their kind of calendar system, New Year system. And it's some kind of mathematical way to try to for people in the past try to know, okay, what are the placeholder of this year? It has no, I don't think, I would argue it has no meaning after all, but some people may interpret them as um, evocational signs. Presumably people born in the dragon year will have a dragon spirit, but it's very hard to define what dragon spirit it is. Also, it's very hard to define what mouse or mice spirit it is. So if people assume if people believe for those people are born in the mice or mouse year have a vicious or negative spirit, then there would not be so much birth given in these mice or mouse year. But there are, so I don't think they do have any meanings. They're rather just placeholders.
What is your personal favorite part of Chinese New Year? Like what? Well, first of all, what is it? What is it called in China? Is it called literally Chinese New Year, or is it just called New Year? Or is it does it have a different name in Chinese?
We just call it New Year. Of course, we don't add
No, of course, of course.
the emphasize the
No, no,
Chinese
no.
in
But I
front
mean,
of it.
is there like, um, there's no? It's just New Year's.
Yeah, they're just New Year's. Before we use the Western calendar, like to say, well, since the birth of our Lord Jesus Christ, we don't have that calendar, so we don't have the New Year in the traditional in nowadays traditional sense, which means back into the 18th or probably 17th century, when you ask people in China what's the denotation or what do they mean when they say New Year, they will definitely tell you. Of course, that's the started of the Chinese new calendar. They don't have the knowledge of Jesus Christ, which means they will not celebrate the 1st of January because they don't even know what's the meaning of January. Probably January is the meaning of some kind of Roman god who will have two faces. They've never been to Rome, they don't know Roman gods, and they don't know January. Therefore, they don't have the idea of celebrating the 1st of January. Rather, when you speak to Chinese in Chinese language, ask them, what do you mean by New Year? They will tell you the first day of the Chinese lunar calendar.
Again, what is your personal favorite part of Chinese New Year? What do you like about it the most, or do you even like it? I don't know. Maybe I'm assuming that you don't that you like it, but maybe you don't like it. I don't know.
Um, I like it. I like it. What is my? Hmm, there's just so much. fun there and so much interesting activities. I just can't tell you which one is my favorite. I mean, all those kind of interesting activities that you can find on social media and stuff, they're all very interesting.
Okay, okay, I understand. Um, Listen, you mentioned two interesting things in when you were talking about Christmas in China. You mentioned about the rise of populism in China,
Yes?
and then you mentioned kind of the effects of COVID. Um,
Yes.
People still feeling that, and I would love to dive into both of those subjects. Maybe talking about COVID because I don't, it's such an interesting thing to me because obviously it originated in China. So we you hear a lot. Oh, it's the virus came from China, which it did come from China, but like you know, uh,
Wuhan virus.
right. And I don't think people. It was almost like we were seeing it on the news, and it was in China. It was really bad, and then just like it was gone. It felt like China had just finished it, and I think people didn't understand that like it was still going on for in China for a while. So I mean, could you just give some kind of inside perspective about what that? I mean, were you even in China for COVID?
Well, for me personally, it's a very, very, very unpleasant thing. And I was in China during part of the COVID lockdown. And in China nowadays, people are talking the COVID period as the 3 special years because the Chinese government has started their lockdown and zero COVID policy from the beginning of 2020, and it had been continued for 3 years till the abolishment of this zero of any kind of variation of zero COVID policy, which means the zero COVID policy had been lasted for 3 years, and therefore the name 3 years period was given to dedicate the COVID pandemic in China.
Wait,
And it's very
three
different.
3 year
Yes,
period?
yes.
How come? Oh wait, because the lockdown
3 years special period.
because the
I'm
lockdowns
translating that from
right,
Chinese.
right, but the lockdowns were lifted. Explain to me again why it's called the 3 year period.
Oh, yes. It is because there were zero COVID policies. And for the reason why I use the plural form, because it is not one type of policy. In the beginning of 2020 and also in 2021, the, well, not only the government, but also people like me believed that the COVID can be contained. And it can be contained by by very strict method of quarantine, mass tests, etc. It just can be contained. But afterwards, after those variations of um, the bacteria, people started to think, well, it's getting more and more common, like normal flu, normal. Get they just for people who had COVID, they just feel like they had a very bad cold, and it's just very hard for them to realize they do need to quarantine themselves, and it's getting harder and harder for the government to contain the spread of COVID. And therefore, they started some variation of zero COVID policy, for instance, to make sure there are zero increase in one city in one day, or to make sure there are zero reports of new quarantine members in one city in one day. It's just like rhetoric things to massage with the figures. And therefore, the zero COVID policy has been interpreted and reinterpreted in many, many different ways till the very end. Till the very end. I cannot exactly recall when that is, but it's it's around 2023 or 2000. it's around the end of 2003 when the government, central government, when Peking officially decided we should end the any containment of COVID. We're just going to end quarantine. We're just going to end massive tests. And then suddenly, boom, no quarantine, no test whatsoever. There, people do not talk about COVID anymore. People just not afraid of COVID anymore. And hence, there had been 3 years of the practice of zero COVID policies. And therefore, nowadays, people in China are using the title three special years to nominate, denote the COVID eras.
And
The COVID era, I should say.
so kind of talk to me about what the impact was on people's, not just their health and whatever, but also their behaviors and their attitudes about life and their mental health and their mental states. Like, talk to me about
Of
how that
course.
changed kind of the way of life in China. Or, I mean, again, I keep saying in China, and that's a little bit of like, I know it's wrong to say that because you're one.
Everything is
It,
connected with everything else.
yeah, and it's a huge country. You know, it's again, um, you're in Nanjing. You know, you're not in Shanghai. You're not in
Yeah.
Beijing. You're not in Tibet. So it's going to vary region to region. But again, you know, about your experience and what you know and what you feel. Apologize to the viewers if I keep on saying, you know, China writ large, China generally, and just assuming that Anshan is the representative to speak on everybody in China. That's not what I'm trying to
No, no.
imply. And I recognize there's epistemic um, fallacies or errors in that logic. So anyway, Anshan, continue.
Thank you very much for the clarifications. And also, I think when you speak of the mental health and people's um, just people's mental health in general, it's also closely linked with your two previous topics, like celebration of Christmas and Chinese New Year. But in the summary, I think people are more, first of all, people are more feeling, there's a feeling, I would say, there's a feeling of angst, and there is a feeling of depressed. And I would like to, and those feeling of angst and depressed closely linked to people's um, change of behaviors. For instance, do not, try not to celebrate Chinese New Year in a traditional way. And I would explain that. I will go back to the Chinese New Year when I've explained the impact of the mental impact, psychological impact. I'm not talking about any political like or any social impact. It's first of all, I just mentioned that it's fear. It is really the lockdown and the quarantine, the very strict lockdown and quarantine and massive tests has a huge impact on people's understanding of liberty and understanding of demand. It's because, well, we Chinese just naturally, I don't say naturally, but a priori have the understanding of liberty a priori different from yours. So there were further restrictions. For instance, cannot go out of your neighborhood, cannot even go out of a building, or cannot even go one step out of your apartment or your, well, in China, most people live in apartment rather than US, probably houses, etc. They're just strict restrictions on individual liberties. And also, people got some food delivered during lockdown rather than go shopping them. We have some kind of social organizations try to deliver food to those people in quarantine. And even when those people are not in quarantine, it's very hard for them to buy food and Lebensmittel. I don't know how to say Lebensmittel in English, like the necessary living materials,
like living
like
materials,
clothes.
living materials,
Yeah, just living materials, including clothes and those very
supplies,
necessary
and like,
things.
yeah,
Supplies, yes. It's very hard for them to get from free market because most of the market were closed due to quarantine. And also, if you buy them from, if you use online shopping, it's very hard for you to get your parcel delivered. Also due to quarantine and restrictions, parcel needs also to be cleared and first cleaned and second cleared, like cleared by special organizations and cleaned with alcohol or cleaned with some kind of sanitizer before they can be delivered. So it's both very hard to get in physically and also get goods delivered digitally, and which means they just lost confidence in free market economy. So they just want to save more for potential uncertainty. People started to save money and to save as much as possible, try to avoid those kind of uncertainty in the future. And it just probably it results in a deflation. And the deflation had already been started a few years before. And the second thing I talked about is angst. That is in Heidegger's sense, that is the alienation from your inner self, from your awareness, from your self-awareness. Because when you basic needs are threat, when you basic living, when those living, when you can't get your basic needs met, like what's that kind of hierarchy? The five stuff, the very basic stuff is security and food, those things. When you can't even make sure you feel secured and make sure you can feed yourself, you just try to strive for as much as food as you can gather as possible and try to collect as much masks in your home as possible in order to make sure you can wear a mask outside. Therefore, you can go outside because if you don't have a mask, you cannot go outside. And all those things results in a so they just can't they just don't have the energy to focus on their inner self. They try to go with a mask, go with a policy, go with whatsoever outside themselves. And also, people lost physical contact. We lost huge amount of time and amount of possibilities to contact with each other, even close friends. For instance, from my personal experience, when I was in Nanking in 2021, there was several cases founded in the Nanking International Airport. And since when those cases were founded in that airport, I was also traveling to Nanking through that airport within several days of the period in that case was being found. And therefore, for all those people who had traveled to Nanking by airplane in this 14-day period, 7 days before cases identified and 7 days afterwards cases identified, all those people has to be quarantined. And one of my relatives also went to the airport in those 14 days, and their family members had also been quarantined. We just cannot contact with each other. And even after even those restrictions had lifted, we are just afraid once we contact each other, and later we discovered actually one of us had accidentally, unconsciously went to some places that afterwards a case had been identified. Then we had to self-quarantine ourselves. And therefore we just naturally castrated ourselves. We just do not want to make contact with each other, even as friends, even as relatives. And this kind of losing contact with each other is even more serious than losing contact with the nature, because humans are social animals. When you're thinking you're losing contact with the nature, naturally you're assuming that you are having contact with the people. But in that 3 years period, people just losing contact with the people. And it results in a deeper kind of fear that is angst. And that is so incredible self-damaging because it's just self-castrating of physical contact, but also of mental thinking, that we are kept to be silent about our experience and kept to think back, or lessons could be learned from those things, and therefore resulting in a deeper depressed and alienated individuals in society.
So, Anshan, I that's very interesting. First of all, very interesting stuff. I just have a little bit of a surprise for you, as I mentioned, because you are a very interesting tweeter. You tweet a lot of very interesting things. They're very fascinating. I highly recommend all of you guys go follow him at Anshan Li. But when you were talking about self castration, emasculation, it reminded me of a tweet that I saw a couple days ago in which you said, the self emasculation and castration of others around me keep me awake till the sunrise. People expect to be treated as merely a dispensable tool, and they treat others never as an end in itself, a bloody hell. Can you just explain what you meant by that in more detail?
Yes, I can. I First of all, I want to find a quotation from Aristotle, which is also quoted from someone else, that is Parmenides. That Parmenides and both Plato said that Eros is the most ancient and most honorable god. And Eros in Greek's term is usually translated or understood as erotic love, sexual love, etc. And first of all, before I clarify what I meant, I just want to say what I do not meant. I do not speak in a sexualist term or in a um, erotic term that castration is the direct denotation of castrated sexual organ. What I meant is, first of all, it is a active deeds that are done only by individuals, to an individual, for an individual. He or she, himself or herself, relates to his or her very innate inability, that is, to love. And erotic love, if I can interpret that in a different way, I think it is it's like language. We do love each other like we acquire language from our environment. We learned how to love. We developed our sexual ability when we reached our puberty, reached our maturity. Like we are talking to each other in a meaningful way and in a syntactical correct way, hopefully, though I'm making huge tons of grammatical mistakes, but also in a semantical meaningful way, like we can understand each other's sentences. And I think that's also the case for love. But the problem is love is not so picked or not so learned as language. We learned love in a very polluted, very wrongly way because love had been polluted and had been wronged by our history, by our society. Just like Benjamin said, that the civilization is always a barbarianization. The civilization of human beings is always a barbarianization of human beings. There are so much hypocrisy, so much evils, and so much sexual stuffs, sexual interpretations of our ability to love. We do not love each other as human beings. We do not love their essence. We do not love them as a personhood. Rather, we love them in a way that they can satisfy our needs, meet our criteria, that they are interpreted or they could be interpreted or molded in the way that we would like them to be molded. And in that way, that is what I meant we are treating each other merely as means and never as ends in itself. And speaking of self-castration, that is, we are striving both for molding others, but also for molding ourselves in a way that the society want like us to be, or what the environment had, or in a way that in the environment that we are in, that we were exposed, or we are exposed, or we are being exposed, that would like to put ourselves in a way. So we forgot our ability to think reflectively of ourselves, have our self-awareness, to love ourselves. Because only when we are loving ourselves, when we can think reflectively and we can have self-awareness. It's because we love ourselves not as what we've done, not as what we've achieved, not as what we look like, but as a person, as a being, as a as an end. And that's yes.
I was gonna say, I know I've kind of done a little bit of you know, jump roping from place to place, and you know, leaping from one end to the other. But I do think this ties together to the previous point you were making about one of the results of the COVID and this strict lockdown where people are afraid to go outside. People were afraid to, you know, leave their homes, and it created all this angst that people now have. Um, I wonder if there's any kind of social effects right now in China, particularly related to what you were just talking about, love, and among young people, and if there's any issues that young people are having getting out there, so to speak, and meeting other new people, finding love, or just kind of something that you've noticed happening.
I can't speak actually from a very precise way because I just lost contact with the young Chinese people. And for you, you might think that I'm actually in my hometown, but for me, I think I'm actually in alienation and I'm actually in exile. I can't give you a very precise and detailed answer, but I can speak on behalf of myself when I'm thinking reflectively. Um, you asked me the impact of the COVID and also how it impacts our relationships with each other. I would say, first of all, from a materialized view, that is, people just don't feel secured. There's an incredibly increase, incredibly increased feeling of insecurity. Um, I don't want to use young people as an example, but rather use my parents. they have an incredible feeling of insecurity about their pension scheme, house mortgage, housing price, because in China we don't have a very good social scheme, so a pension scheme, and therefore people actually in China using buying properties in order to save money or in order to do it as an investment, like you pay money for your social security. But one day, of course, not one day, but currently the housing price is declining in China, which means the pension, indirect pension, are declining. And also there are changing social health care system, and there are reforms. Not people are just not quite sure what's these reforms are going to lead or end about, and also resources, children education, resources about child's education, kindergarten, primary school, middle school, and it's getting more and more expensive. People are feeling more and more insecure and insecure about their future, not only about their future, but also about their children's future. And speaking about the young generation in general, I just assume if those things that I observed are not merely individual cases, but also quite common in China, it could be result in a way that young people are more and more not willing to get married or to give birth. And also, they would like to meet, they want to feel secure most, feel secured first and foremost before they can do anything else. For instance, awareness of something, some social science, awareness of their self, awareness of love, etc. Which means what they are seeking in relationship, first of all, I would assume, is not caring of others, or, but rather caring for themselves. And in that way, they are seeking satisfaction from the things that they can never be satisfied. Because if you want to feel secured, first of all, you want to secure your inner self. You want to make sure that young panic child, which had lived through the COVID, is um, is no longer trapped in that period. But you can't release or you can't I don't know how to say it. You just can't see yourself in the mirror because whatever you see in the mirror is something else. You must see yourself in yourself with yourself, which means you can't see yourself in anyone's eyes. You just can't find love in anyone's eyes. You have to find love in yourself's heart and in your own mind. And therefore, I would say about young relationships, people are getting more and more less serious about each other and just huge change of family structure. And it's not only related to COVID, but also relates to one-child policy. The one-child policy has created a massive change in Chinese family structure. That is such a huge decentralization that people have not been aware with. Um, Also related to Chinese New Year. When you ask me the question, what do I like most? When I celebrate the Chinese New Year. I was just thinking all the celebrations was gone. It could never and will never come back because there's huge family structure that were used to celebrate together when the elder was still here. I just can no longer be the case. I do not have any siblings, and my parents have very limited siblings. And presumably in the next generation, we some of us are never going to have child anymore, and some of us probably, if they can have more several children, those children will be developing a totally different environment, totally different society comparing to ourselves. And therefore, the traditional Chinese New Year was celebrated in the way that based on huge family structure, traditional value, farmer-son relationships, all those things have been changed and could never come back, could never come back. So, um, relates to also talking back to the to youth relationships. I would say it's just so different. It's it's going to be in a dialectic movement.
Listen, when you were talking about, well, okay, kind of this wider social trend in the U.S. and in Western Europe, I would say, is the rise of this OnlyFans concept, and pornography has really taken off. Um, and part of me, when you were talking about the effects of COVID and this angst that young people have, and this mistrust, um, part of me wondered if that can explain kind of the rise and use of these, what I would call, internet relationships, where you don't have to do anything and you can imagine yourself having these intimate relationships just from your room in the dark, or from your bed without having gone outside. And I know, you've thought a lot about philosophy of love, and theories of love and such. And I wondered if you had any opinions about why these such things have really taken off, and what explains, um, why, I guess, you know so many people have turned to it. And I think too, like your point about the objectification of others is very, pertinent to this phenomenon for sure. But I'm wondering if you have any other thoughts. As you eat a cracker, you can think about it. I mean, is there even only is OnlyFans, like, is something like OnlyFans even allowed in China? No.
OnlyFans is not allowed, officially allowed in China, but I think just a few days before, some people discover they can visit OnlyFans website without special techniques. But though this kind of format, those kind of format do not officially exist in China, it had been unofficially existed before COVID. I think it's I I don't know much about these online content materials and those creative creative stuff, to be honest.
Sure, but it plays into kind of a wider theme of.
Yes, there are similar schemes in China. We call it as Buddhist prostitute, I would say. Yeah, because they're creating content in a way that Buddhist has reached um what's the name of that in English? Like they can no longer they can no longer suffer. Like for the Buddhists who reached that kind of state, but rather than go, yeah, yeah, like enlightenment. When they are enlightened, but they want to save more people, they become Buddhistavia. And in China, and also Buddhistavia used to be a male phenomenon in India, but it has changed into a female phenomenon in China. So when you visit those temples in China, when you see a Buddhistavia, it's always depicting the female figure. So sometimes people in China will name those people who public creative contents of their body and of other things, publish them online, but as Buddhistavia prostitute, not Buddhist
But
prostitute,
even
sorry.
I mean even just beyond the specifics of this in China, I mean what are your thoughts on the rise of, you know, because there's a lot of stats out there that young people are increasingly lonely, uh, that they're increasingly not having relationships, that increasingly obviously usage of pornography and stuff like, I mean I think OnlyFans at this point is basically pornography, but maybe that's something people would disagree with, but you know it's the kind of the use of external online sites to fill, you know, the void of otherwise meaningful relationships. Do you have any opinions on why that's the case? I mean, I know you do because you tweet about it. Them, uh, you tweet about pornography, so I know you have opinions. So that's why I wanna hear.
You're putting me on a very, very hard position because I do have opinions, but it's very hard for me to say. But still, I want to touch on a very specific area that is pornography. Um, when I was thinking about pornography, and as you said, if OnlyFans is a genre of pornography, not a specific genre, but a general genre, and people are alienated not only with others, with their friends, classmates, etc., due to COVID, due to the change, the digital reform, but also with themselves as they feeling bored. In that case, their relationship with pornography, I would say, not as an industry, not as a specific genre, but as pornography per se, is a twofold domination. And also, people have touched upon the topics of genre and of pornography, like the male gaze or male domination in the industry. Also, how the producer and how the relationship between the producer and the actor are so unbalanced and so unfair, etc. But I'm not talking about the specific relations in pornography, but between pornography and the receiver. And I was thinking the receiver, for instance, if I go to OnlyFans, how to pronounce OnlyFans, I I would choose. I don't use OnlyFans, but I would say Pornhub. If I go to Pornhub and choose a specific genre like uh gold hair, Asian or threesome, etc., those are quite. I mean, basic types. There are also more hardcore types that is more extreme. When people are getting more addicted to a substance, they want the low addiction can the lower level the lower dose can no longer satisfy them. Probably they'll go to some extreme genre. But I'm not talking about the addictive behavior or addiction per se, but rather talking about pornography. People are choosing those genre types and because they do have an influence and dominance on that. If one type or one genre can no longer satisfy the mass, the receiver will just abandon that and choose a new genre. Just like how people abandon marijuana and choose heroin, or people abandon the heroin and choose cocaine. I would assume the similar thing would happen in pornography. And therefore people are dominate people for this receiver, they are in a dominant position because they do have the ability to choose. And also for the pornography, they they dominate the receiver because they have changed the the way that the way they wave the neurons in their mind or those biological structure in their mind in a way that the receiver is not aware. And also, because the receiver gained sexual knowledge, probably also knowledge about relationships, knowledge about how to start erotic or how to maintain an erotic relationship from pornography in general. The pornography dominate the receiver just like how the media dominate us, because we've been fulfilled with those informations that we are not allowed in a very passive way by algorithm or by algorithm or by something else, by selection. And therefore it's a two-form domination. And speaking from that perspective, um, wonderful. That's so weird. Speaking from that perspective, that twofold domination, I would say the OnlyFans itself, the creator is also dominated, is also in a position of dominance and also in a position of submission. So in that way, if the content that they created can no longer satisfy their receiver, and I believe in most of the case, it's is the case. Like the only top 1% or top 0.5% are really making fortune from this industry. And also people are using AI and other technologies to change this industry. I think it's beyond this podcast. I think that scope is beyond the podcast. But what I want to say is they are also living in the fear and angst because they fear because they're just afraid they will lose their receiver. People are no longer interested in them, and therefore they are creating the content in a way that they are not aware. They are just alienated from themselves. I'm talking about the content
Right,
creator.
right. So if I could just kind of try to understand what you're saying
Yes,
is saying it's not just the users who feel alienated and angst and feeling like they're not able to go out and have relationships, but it's also the
the creator.
creators who feel like I'm not worth enough, or I'm not worth on my own to just go out and talk to people, so I need to like shape myself in a way that not literally shape, but like present myself in a way that is just overly sexualized in order to like sell and not to like prove that I'm worthy.
Um, Yes, in one way, it is the case that the creator w- are not so secure that they can still be popular and to shape their body and their expressions in a way that can be more creative or more attractive. But it doesn't necessarily mean that their inner self is alienated from their emotions or their awareness. Because some people probably are just um, because each individual is different from each other. I assume some people, I know this is going to be hugely controversial, but it's just my assumption. I assume some people naturally gain pleasure from from being in a popular position or being exposed to a mass audience or being perceived, being being praised or being whatsoever by as much audiences as possible. So probably in a way that they are not alienated from themselves because that's the true expression of themselves. But I think that is not a universal phenomenon. Just like not every not everyone of us would like to stand in the center of the stage. There are I just assume there are some. or probably many creators that do not want to express their bodily exposure, or their inner self, like how they want to be treated, how they want to be gazed at, how they want to be understood in the way that they are created in that content. So I think we can't be too indicative or too extreme in this scenario, because it's um, it's just about human nature, and I am not. I still would like to study and do more research on that topic if I can go to a graduate program. But from my understanding now, I just think it's um, it's not the case. It's not completely the case, but it's definitely the case for the receiver, I think.
So it's not. It's definitely the case the receiver feels angst and anxiety and
Yes.
whatnot, but you're not. You think it's possible that the creator feels that, but you're not certain.
Yes, I would not sure. I would say probably most of the creator are in the case, because first of all, only the very top, like 5 or 1% of the content creator can really make a profit. And second, the industry is also ever changing. That there are new ways to making them popular, get more exposure, and for those people like the mass creator, they are actually falling behind. They do not have the resource, have the energy, and or they even don't know how to make them um, more popular. So I think that's most of the case for the creator, but definitely not the absolute case.
Anshan, I want to turn now because to you mentioned also, and I had this in the back of my head when you said this, but I wanted to get to it. So before I forget, tell me more about the rise of populism in China and what that means, what that looks. What you said?
No, no, no. Yes, I just thought. Oh my God, I also forgot about it. Yes,
Yeah,
please.
and just what exactly that looks like because I really think that's something most people outside of China have no conception of, don't understand at all. Um,
When did I talk about it?
you talked about it in the context of why Chinese New Year is being
Oh,
no,
Christmas, Christmas. Yes.
Christmas, right? Christmas is not being nobody is celebrating Christmas, and you talked about
Yes.
populism in the context of that. And when I think of populism, I think of people like Trump and Orban and um, Le Pen in France. But I definitely don't think of Xi Jinping and this and so
No, it's not. It's not that kind. It's not that kind of
okay.
populism.
Please explain what you meant
Of
by
course.
the rise of populism.
I can still recall that when I use the word populism, I said why Christmas is getting less and less popular in China. And also I mentioned that Christmas is a very modern phenomenon that has been China that has been known by the Chinese people probably just a few decades before. That's because the open and reform policy only started a few decades before, like 40 years before. And before that, China was, the Chinese people were so poor and so ignorant and so violent. And just after the Cultural Revolution, it's just a chaos. So from first of all, I want to talk after I briefly touch about the history, and first of all, I want to talk about the topic that is might sound a little bit unrelated to populism, but it's very important. That is uh, moral education. Um, in China, we don't have the Christian moral doctrine. We don't deduce morality from any kind of divine law, nor we we also don't have those French Revolution. We don't we don't have the that we don't have the idea that we can sacrifice. I mean, before before the uh, before the establishment of People's Republic of China, we do not have the idea that we can compromise or we can sacrifice part of our interests, part of our rights, in order to be secured and to be protected by a legislative body. And therefore, we neither have a deduced morality nor a induced morality, which means in past centuries in China, people would assume that they can be governed by Plato's philosophy king. If the philosophy king is in, like the emperor in the Qing dynasty, is in the right mind, or is in his right mind, or is well educated, is blah blah blah, then everything would be prosperous. But if it is another case, the king is not a Plato's philosophy king, then everything would be in chaos. Presumably that's the case. And the problem is, it's very hard. The China, I would say we the Chinese, um, a little bit suspicious of American separation of power and the um, and also we are a little bit suspicious of the divine law. So we use another kind of moral education that is nationalism. That is to love our party, love our nation, love our people. And the most effective tool for that education is to teach the past, like the evil of the colonizing West when Hong Kong and Russia, Japan invaded China, took over Hong Kong, took over mainland China. We would like to take those territories back, and
You didn't
therefore the
mention. Did you mention the
reunification.
Japanese
Yes,
in that?
yes, yes,
Okay.
and not only Japan but also US. And therefore the reunification of Hong Kong is really a big deal, a big psychological moment for the Chinese mass. We can see that China is no longer it's a symbol for us that China had went out of the being colonized era and really stepping forward into the new millennium. So the reunification of Hong Kong from our perspective is hugely different from the Westerns. And also it is about how the Japan invaded China and delivered massacres, etc., those kind of stuff. And the government would like to use this kind of nationalist education to let their people have the moral understanding that they have to be strong, they have to be tolerant, they have to be wise, as wise as a philosophy king. Of course, I don't want to talk about the possibility to achieve those unachievable ends in this podcast, but I just want to say that they just want to use those educations to teach some kind of moral values to our people. I should not, well, they, us. Well, it's okay. So also so in that kind of background, historical background and the doctrine, what is the most effective tool is to teach Mao's success in military strategies and Mao's talks, like loving and care of the peasants, because the difference between Mao and Lenin is one started revolution from the workers in the factory or in the city, another one started the revolution in the rural areas in China. So Mao naturally differentiated from Lenin in a way that Mao loves people, the peasants more, and therefore the nationalist education also entails that we should not only be strong um, wise, dependent, but also to love our people, love each other. And I think in one way or another, it is a good strategy. But um, there are also fallacies or potential weaknesses in this kind of way. That is why I think populism is rising in China. The first thing is this kind of education, like colonization, fighting for independence, delivering revolutions, is going to result in a black and white mental mind. There are only right and wrong. There are no compromises, no sacrifice, no willingly sacrifice of part of my rights in order to meet, say, broader, more wider, secured interest of the society. And also, there are negative views on foreigners, like Japanese, Americans, the British, which naturally you can assume as a consequence as this kind of um, movement.
So people
And
have.
also,
Oh
yes, yes, please. People have,
no, I was gonna say, please finish. Please finish.
oh, and also that's one of the results that leads to populism. And then uh, another one is the lack of the understanding of liberty and e equality, I would say, because one of the Maoist doctrine is similar to Trotsky's, that you shall continue the revolution till the whole mankind had turned into communist regime. It is somehow similar. That's why I think Mao is so popular. Mao was and is probably so popular in Latin America and Africa because there are only fight and flee, no liberty, no compromise, no equality. So we are always in a continuous revolutionary state, which ends in a negation of freedom, I would say. Yes. And the third thing is very, very closely related to Christmas. That's why I bring this topic. That is I won't say hate, but the soil hate of US and US citizens. The first of all is US sanctions on Chinese entities, Chinese enterprises and Chinese personnel, which are related to communication, semiconductors, space, cyberspace, etc. All this high-end tech that is seen as a similar move as the British in the 19th, 20th century when they colonized Hong Kong in Chinese people's understanding. That is, they are inputting their colonization and imperialization idea, colonist and imperialist exploitation and ideologies onto Chinese. I won't argue that whether forgive me if you find this offensive because I agree with Chomsky's part of his political views that Americans somehow do have some I mean the American executive
I don't
do
find it
have
offensive at all. So please.
okay okay I'm just saying that the Chinese people would view those American sanctions and the houses as a colonized power and then imperialist power that want to harm China. And also link back to what I've said, a continuous revolutionist idea is ending the result that people's nationalist beliefs are reinforced. They want to strengthen the military might. They want to make their tech advantage. They want to have advantages in tech industries or in more industries, in every industry, in as much industries as possible. Because it's always going to be in a revolutionary mode, and the American is colonizing us, so we need to fight back, and therefore we have to get advantage in every possible places as possible. So that's resulting in a rise of populist ideas, and yeah, I think that's basically what I meant. No, it is not. It is in Mao's idea. It is constant, but it is not in most of the Chinese idea. But still, most of the Chinese went through the Cultural Revolution and are still influenced by the Cultural Revolution. And therefore, I would say, though explicitly it is not a phenomenon, but implicitly it is.
And so is that where that kind of, as you were saying, that fight or flight attitude that's very prevalent among people, is that where that comes from?
I would say implicitly, yes, it is.
Okay. And then the other thing you mentioned was kind of nationalism and the strong sense of loyalty that people have to the party and the nation and the leaders. Um, nationalism is this word that kind of gets thrown around, and particularly, I would say, in the academic discourse, it gets seen as a negative term, as a negative connotation, because it gets associated with people like Hitler and Mussolini.
Stalin, Hitler.
Right. And I'm wondering, you know,
Probably I should use the word patriotism.
sure, but I mean, nationalism, as I see it, means exactly what you said. Kind of this strong ideology that's rooted in the nation, right?
Hmm. Yes, please continue.
Well, it's this idea that the nation is the most important thing, and that my number one loyalty is to the nation.
And
Well, that seems to be to me what you were describing, right?
yes,
Do you think that, I don't know, do you have any opinions about whether or not this is something that's good? Like, it seems like that this, in theory, could be a good thing. It could also say downsides to it. Um, what is your perspective on nationalism, like, writ large?
there are, of course, there are arguments on both sides, and that's why Hegel is so controversial. I think his idea of this nationalist guys, those collective ideals, it's very controversial, and people are tending to say that this kind of thing do not exist. Um, it's just a collective representation of individuals' ideals or individuals' things, just like how the free market works. But I think there have been um, I think one of our professors in the university, Mark Spencer, delivered a talk on YouTube, and I watched it. That is about the whether those kind of collective ideals exist or not. And he argued, yes, it is. And he said why it is the case, because from a mathematical perspective, then he did. I forgot what was his original argument, but no, probably I should drop that because I can't remember it anyway. But that argument was very good, um, because
I
it's
guess
math.
okay. I guess I
Uh,
guess what I'm asking is, um, do people, because of this strong ties to the state, is there this sense, because in the US, right, we have a very strong sense of individualism. I'm doing it for
mm,
myself, I'm doing it for my close family, etc. Is that different in China, where it's I'm my purpose is to help and play my role in helping the nation? and the state of China as a whole. Um,
Hmm, I would say, I would assume that it is definitely the case for those people in Politburo, but it is not the case for us, for my family members, and for the mass, because the idea is just so huge, it's just so incomprehensible that what can I do in order to do the best for the people? It always ends in a way that what I do is first of all best for myself and then best for the people. And please allow me to explain why it is the case. The first thing is you talked about the mass media that has a huge about the media, it has a huge effect of alienation. And it is even severe in China. Chinese TikTok, Chinese Instagram had a huge impact on people's daily life. People's time had been fulfilled with short videos, other many type of many kind of created contents that they are not interested or they are just ignorant of politics, of sociology, of philosophy, whatsoever, history whatsoever, even Chinese history. And second is actually people in China are very poor, very, very poor. Though if one day you come to China, you will find, oh my God, the flight ticket, the train ticket are so cheap. But for most of the Chinese, it's still very expensive for them. It's going to for one ticket from my city to Peking by train. It's going to cost probably one one eighth of their monthly salary. And also, please remember that we don't have a good national health system. We don't have any pensions or good, secure national health system. We have to save a lot in order to secure our future, in order to secure our um, health bills. That's why you can hear those talks about Chinese economy. That is, people are saving more and more. They just don't want to spend. It might be the case, but it's also the case that people are earning less and less because of the deflation. So people are just incredibly poor. They just don't have the opportunity to even communicate with each other in other cities, in other provinces. And also, we don't have such a huge liberty as you Americans. You can fly to most of the countries wherever you want, and to have the financial stability to support the tickets. And we have to apply for visas. We have to plan the trips ahead. And it's just so difficult for most of us to go out and to see other cultures, to experience other cultures. And also, most of the people in China, I would say, um, they're not, they cannot, of course, they are iterate, but in a way that you have this very, very intelligent and incredibly brilliant um, coders, mathematics, physicists come from China. But talking about humanity and um, humanity in general, people don't understand it very much, including me. So we just don't have the physical opportunity to talk with each other, nor the mental ability to understand these topics. And sorry, what was your question?
I don't even remember, to be honest. Um,
Well,
some something
uh,
about nationalism and um, perspective on.
oh yes, yes. Whether the ideal, whether the nationalist collective ideal impacts people's decisions. And I would say it's because people are, due to those physical and mental limitations, people have very limited access to those ideals. People do not understand them. People do not talk much about them. And people in different areas view them from different perspectives. Like people in Mongolia will view that national ideal hugely different from those people in in Guangzhou, in the very south part of China. And people in Shanghai will view it very different from people in Sichuan, in the very center of China. So as that results in the way that people can only act first and foremost for their individual liberty and for their individual ideas, aka money. That's why when you asked me previously, what is a widely practiced religion in China, I would say money seeking, because that satisfies most people's initiate and intrinsically motive. That is to no longer be poor, that can feed themselves, can be respected, etc. But also it is because of the one party system and also because of the way China have been so throughout millenniums that we just think in a collective way, that we want a philosophy king and we want a strong centralized government. It's so different from US, I know. You're afraid of government, you're afraid of centralization. But for us, we are afraid of decentralization. We are afraid of federalism because back into the 1930s, 1920s, when each part of China is ruled by its own military leader, it ends in chaos and it ends in mass famine. Mass famine always the result of poor regulation and not poor logistics. And that's the way we want huge, powerful central government. And you can also learn that from a very ancient Chinese um, tale, I would say, that one of the three most ancient Chinese king, who is named as Yu, gained his seat from his predecessor by building a dam in order to fix the problem of the flood, uh, fix the problem of the river, I think. That's one of the fairy tales that we've learned, or probably for thousands of the thousand Chinese learned through thousands and thousands of years. That's why we want huge, powerful central governments. Whereas in US, it's so different.
Can you explain the point about the dam story again? The wants to
Ah, the dam.
solve the problem,
Yeah,
so he builds a massive dam.
that's so interesting. That's so interesting. It always makes me laugh when I was thinking about the Great War and comparing to Odyssey. For us, the culture is just so different.
I know, but explain because I didn't understand
Yes, yeah.
that story.
For us, the Chinese, um, probably also for me, though I am changing, that we assume that we can be naturally grown and naturally died in the nature, to the nature, and with the nature. So we are tightened we mentally fettered ourselves to the land, to a small place that we think we can call it home, that we are afraid of exploding, we're afraid of discovery, we're afraid of um, risks, insecurity, whatsoever. We just want to feel secure. We just want to pick the apples from the tree when it is ripe. That's why the Chinese people are so closely tied to their land, to their homeland, that when you see those Chinese artists in exile, you can always sense a feeling of homelessness, a feeling of nostalgia, a feeling of sick of its home, but also wants to reunify, to return to its home. It's such a weird feeling when you talk to those Chinese in exile, in foreign cultures. They're always criticizing the government, the CCP, even its people, but in a similar way that they want to be reunified with their people, with another party, with another strong central government. That is so strange. Sorry, I just jumped the topic way ahead. Um, but back to your question about the dam. That is, it used to be the case that when it was very warm, most of the ancient Chinese resided in today's Shanxi, or places near in the west part of Peking, that is in the quite north part of China. And in that area, there are not much mountains around. Also, there are not much rivers or not much seas around. Or actually, you can't even see the sea. There are only big rivers, one Yellow River, one Yangtze River. And when there are floods, which means your whole effort in the spring, in the summer, is going to be vanished, is going to be destroyed, and you're going to living a kind of insecure life, living exile. You have to go to other places to find foods, etc. And also, it is very hard for one family or for one community to build up dams or to do some collective works in order to control the flood. In order to, because Yellow River is so huge, it's just so big. It's just like America's Mississippi. It's not like Rhine River in Germany. It's not like it's not like the Donau River in Austria. It's just much more wide. It's just much wider. So when ancient people are thinking about those natural disasters, they're thinking about a collective figure which can make orders, which can see from a broader perspective, which can e- is effectively manage different groups from different cultures, different different cults, different families, to collaborate it on a single program to build a fucking dam. That's why we want a powerful, efficient, of course efficient, and also central government.
But so the idea is the dam was like in the story was like a symbol of control.
A symbol, no, not a symbol, I would not say a symbol of control, but a symbol of security. A symbol of security is that we do not want to discover the outside world. We don't want to climb the mountains to discover what is there in the Tibetan plateau, what is there in beyond the desert in the Mediterranean Sea. We don't want to sail into the Black Sea in order to discover some kind of mysterious golden wool. No, it is not the case. We just want to farm our land to make sure our efforts could be result in a fruitful, in a delicious way that we can eat them, we can collect them, and we can store them in a way to avoid future farming, to avoid future insecurity. It's just so different from
That's so interesting because
from the
I mean
rest of
the
the country.
U.S. is always like expanding, getting new land, going further, more bounds, uh, and you know maybe it's history too, right? Like okay, number one, Americans have a lot less, I think, ties to their physical land because it's a newer country and doesn't have as much cultural history as China. And number two, we've never had any real wars on our soil since the American Revolution. we've never really. I mean, we had the War of 1824, but like you know, we're not really for a long time. We haven't really been threatened by like people coming in and invading our country and taking it over. The same way that China has is surrounded by major powers and has had periods of being colonized and stuff like this. And so I wonder if the histories play a role in those different perspectives too. But anyway, I think this is a really good place to call it. We've been talking for a total of like 2 hours now.
Indeed.
I
And I
really
just,
enjoyed this, Anshin. I really enjoyed this discussion.
I enjoyed it too. I,
What?
you just don't know how happy I am.
um, um,
It feels like probably English is my mother tongue.
what?
Seriously, because makes me feel more natural and more happy when I'm talking those English. Probably because of the audience, and I've always been talking English with you guys, and you guys are such a good hero and such good podcast organizer.
Mm, mm. Well, listen, before we go, make sure you guys subscribe, like the video, share with others, check out Anshin's Twitter. Um, and also, if you feel like it, please click the super thanks button and donate to the show because it would be a big
Oh,
help.
you are running an OnlyFans.
No. We've reached the first stage of monetization on the YouTube. So
Great. I
now
was
we
just
can
joking.
take in money. But the
Great,
first
great.
stage of that is like people can buy memberships or they can give super thanks, which is donating donating any amount of money they want.
Great, great.
So if you guys are watching this till the end and are in love with Anshin, please do that. Anshin,
I can also be in any kind of shape you want. I'm a perfect creator.
what did you say?
Oh, I'm just joking.
Oh.
I just said I can be. Never mind.
Were you making a joke about OnlyFans?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay. Well, anyway, Anshin, any last words before I hit the stop on the recording button?
Hmm. I wish we could love ourselves and remember that we are fantastic.
Okay. Well, anyway, thanks for listening and see you guys next time. Bye.